The story begins with a mysterious world perched thousands of miles above the clouds, where stepping foot was nothing short of a death sentence. Despite the danger, a few courageous soldiers risked everything to reach it. But in an instant, they were confronted by the world's most massive and fearsome giant. Jack felt the creature's approach and immediately submerged himself in water to hide. From his hiding spot, he saw a colossal foot stomp down, sending nearby sheep scattering in terror. The giant snatched one up and swallowed it whole. Witnessing this gruesome sight, Jack was paralyzed with fear. Nearby, a soldier hiding behind a tree tried to steal a glance, but the giant caught his scent in the air. Though the soldier ducked back into hiding, the giant began lumbering toward him with massive strides. Panicked, the soldier broke into a run, but it was too late. Without missing a beat, the giant ripped the entire tree out by its roots. The soldier scrambled to escape, but his small legs were no match for the behemoth's stride. With a single blow, the giant knocked him unconscious. Seeing a human for the first time, the creature leaned down to inspect him. Just as he was about to pick the soldier up, the captain rushed forward with his sword and plunged it into the giant's heel with all his might. Howling in pain, the giant spun around and kicked the captain away with a single flick. He pulled the sword from his foot and carried both soldiers off to be eaten. Watching from a distance, Jack was overcome with regret for the mistake that brought them here. It had all started when Jack received several magical beans from a monk. When his girlfriend, who happened to be the princess, came to visit him, one of the beans accidentally came into contact with water. The moment it touched the moisture, it grew so violently that Jack's wooden house began to shake. The ground split open and a massive beanstalk tore through the floor, skyrocketing toward the heavens. The princess tried to flee, but a table fell on her, pinning her down. Jack rushed to help, but a thrashing vine tossed him out of the house. The princess searched for an exit, but the vines jammed the door shut. Jack grabbed an axe to chop at the plant, but by then, the entire house had been ripped from its foundations and was hurtling toward the sky. Jack managed to grab the edge of the house at the last second, but the stalk grew so fast that the house reached thousands of feet in altitude within seconds. During the struggle, a vine snapped, and the princess managed to swing the door open, but the floorboards beneath her gave way. Despite Jack catching her hand, the force was too much, and he went plummeting 10,000 meters toward the earth. His fall was slowed as he bounced off the giant leaves, and he eventually hit the ground and lost consciousness. The princess, however, wasn't as lucky. She was carried up beyond the clouds. The next morning, Jack woke up to find the king standing over him. Jack confessed everything, and when they looked up, they saw the massive beanstalk piercing the sky. Without delay, the king dispatched a troop of soldiers, led by Jack, to rescue the princess. The soldiers climbed the stalk until they reached the world above the clouds. To reach the princess's location, they had to slide across a massive gap. As Jack was preparing his gear, a man with curly hair suddenly kicked him off the ledge. Terrified by the height, Jack lost his grip and fell, but fortunately, he was caught by a cluster of vines further down. As soon as he regained his footing, he continued the climb. At the summit, the weather turned treacherous. Amidst the howling storm and crashing lightning, a bolt struck a soldier directly, knocking him off balance. He slipped, causing a chain reaction that sent other soldiers tumbling. At the last possible moment, one soldier gripped the rope tightly, saving several lives, but the rest were left dangling in midair. If they weren't pulled up immediately, the entire mission would be in jeopardy. Suddenly, Roderick turned to his companion and coldly ordered, "Cut the rope." The man didn't hesitate. He liked the idea and immediately pulled a hidden knife from his boot. The soldiers dangling below begged for their lives, screaming for mercy, but he showed none. He sliced through the rope, and the helpless men plummeted 10,000 feet to their deaths. The remaining soldiers finally scrambled to the summit just as dawn broke. When Jack looked back, his jaw dropped. Above the clouds lay an entire, sprawling world. Mesmerized by the sight, the group began to move forward. Soon, the captain spotted fresh footprints on the ground, confirming his suspicion that the princess hadn't fallen, she was somewhere up here. As they emerged from the cave, they stood in awe. This world was far more vast and mysterious than they had ever imagined. As they scouted the area, they found markers the princess had left on tree branches. Jack even found the book he had given her lying on the ground. Seeing the snapped branches nearby, they were convinced that a dangerous creature had taken her. They split into two teams and headed off in different directions to find her. Eventually, Jack and his companions reached a river where a flock of sheep was grazing. Starving after days of travel, they tried to catch one, but the moment they moved, they triggered a hidden hunter's trap. As Jack and the captain frantically tried to cut themselves loose, an eerie silence fell over the forest. The crows suddenly took flight in a panic, and the sheep scattered. Before they could react, a terrifying roar echoed through the trees, and a massive giant snatched up two of the soldiers. Jack managed to stay hidden and began to shadow the giant, waiting for the perfect moment to rescue his friends and the princess. On the other side of the realm, Roderick reached the edge of a cliff with his 2 associates. When his bald companion suggested that searching this way was a waste of time and turned to find another path, Roderick made his move. "Look, there's Isabelle," he shouted. As the man leaned over the cliff's edge, Roderick shoved him into the deep abyss. Roderick's other friend began to laugh at the cold-blooded act, but his laughter was cut short when a massive hand snatched him out of the air. A giant as large as a mountain stood before them. Roderick fell to the ground, trembling with fear, and scrambled through his bag. Just as the giant reached down to crush him, Roderick pulled out a shimmering, magic crown. The giant froze instantly, like a statue. It was an ancient, powerful crown that forced any giant to bow before its master. Following the giant, Jack reached their secret lair. The scenery was breathtaking, like a paradise of towering waterfalls and jagged peaks. There, a 2-headed giant held the princess captive in a cage. Just then, the giant who had captured the captain and a stout soldier arrived. Suspicious of the human presence, the 2-headed giant grabbed the stout soldier, snapped his neck, and swallowed him whole, spitting out his armor in disgust. As the giant began to threaten the princess, a voice rang out. It was the traitor Roderick. The moment the giant saw the crown on his head, they all dropped to their knees. Roderick's true plan was finally revealed. He commanded the 2-headed giant to bow, stepped on his face, and marched toward the throne. Roderick was now the king of the giants, and he wasted no time declaring war on the human world. Meanwhile, a giant threw the captain onto a heap of sticky dough to prepare him for cooking. The more the captain struggled, the deeper he sank into the adhesive mess. As the giant began gathering flour and vegetables to finish the dish, Jack slipped into the kitchen unnoticed. The princess's face lit up when she saw him, but Jack quickly signaled her to stay silent. He tried to pick the lock on her cage, but it wouldn't budge. Realizing time was running out, the princess urged him to save the captain first, who was lined up with a group of pigs for the slaughter. Jack rushed to the captain's side and began slicing through the sticky dough with his knife. Suddenly, the giant returned with a tray of spices. Jack quickly handed the knife to the captain and dove into hiding. Fortunately, the giant didn't notice a thing. He picked up several sharp wooden skewers and, right before the captain's eyes, plunged them into a nearby pig. The pig's squeals were cut short instantly. The captain was next. The giant lunged with all his might, but his aim was off. The skewer slammed into the table right between the captain's legs. Paralyzed with pure terror, the captain fainted on the spot. Unfazed, the giant picked them all up and placed them near the roaring furnace. The burden of rescue now rested entirely on Jack. He stealthily climbed onto a large iron ring hanging from the ceiling. Below him, the giant grabbed a razor-sharp cleaver and headed toward the princess. He pulled her from the cage, slammed her onto the prep table, and raised his blade. Just as the oblivious giant was about to strike, Jack grabbed a heavy kitchen knife and drove it deep into the giant's spine. The beast let out a blood-curdling scream, but Jack held on tight. Losing control, the giant stumbled backward, crashed into a wall, and collapsed dead. The princess and the captain stood in shock. Recovering quickly, the 3 of them sprinted toward the giant Beanstalk. However, their path was blocked by a sentry sent by Roderick. Jack quickly cooked up a plan. He grabbed a wild beehive and crept up on the sleeping sentry with the captain. While the captain carefully lifted the giant's visor, Jack stuffed the hive inside. The moment the helmet was slammed shut, they bolted and dove behind a large rock to watch. Seconds later, the giant erupted in agony as the bees began stinging him relentlessly. The more he thrashed, the more aggressive the bees became. Panicked and blinded, he stumbled around, tripped over the rocky terrain, and rolled toward the edge of the cliff. In a last-ditch effort, he ripped off his helmet, but a stray bee stung him right in the eye. He lost his balance and plummeted thousands of feet to the clouds below. The trio cheered, unable to believe they had taken down such a titan. As they prepared to descend, the captain suddenly stopped. He told them he had to stay behind to reclaim the magic crown from Roderick. Jack handed him his knife and began the long climb down with the princess. Meanwhile, the sentry giant hit the earth with a bone-shaking thud. Hearing the explosion, the king rushed from his tent and was horrified by the sight of the creature. To protect his kingdom, the king made the gut-wrenching decision to cut down the beanstalk. Soldiers hammered massive iron spikes into the vine and used teams of horses and oxen to pull. Slowly, the gargantuan stalk began to groan and uproot. As it started to snap, the soldiers still on the climb were sent falling into the chaos below. High above, Jack and the princess realized the stalk was collapsing. Terrified, Jack grabbed the princess tightly and caught a dangling branch just in time. They swung through the air like a pendulum and landed safely in a massive haystack, surviving the fall. Back above the clouds, Roderick had finished rallying his army. Just then, the 2-headed giant sensed a human presence. Forcing the captain into hiding, Roderick pulled out the remaining magic seeds to grow new stalks, but the captain ambushed him. In the ensuing scuffle, the seeds were knocked onto a rocky ledge and Roderick tumbled into a deep pit. Terrified, Roderick began screaming for his giants, while the captain stood over him, sword drawn, ready for the final showdown. The two-headed giant ordered the rest of the horde to dig Roderick out. The giants began smashing through the rocks, while deep in the pit below, a brutal struggle broke out between the captain and Roderick. With a swing of his longsword, Roderick knocked the captain down, sending his weapon flying out of reach. Roderick launched a relentless assault on the unarmed captain, who desperately blocked the blows. Soon, the captain's strength began to fail, and Roderick forced his head underwater, trying to drown him. Just then, the captain spotted a knife drifting through the water. In a burst of agility, he snatched it with his teeth and slashed Roderick across the face. Stunned and reeling, Roderick shoved the captain toward the edge of a ledge, trying to throw him off. He began driving his sword into the captain's hands to force him to let go of the rock. But just as Roderick leaned in for the killing blow, the captain seized Roderick's own weapon and plunged it into his leg. As Roderick screamed in agony, the captain drove the sword through his stomach. Roderick slumped over dead, and with his final breath, the magic power of the crown vanished. The captain tried to climb out, but the cavern ceiling suddenly buckled. The two-headed giant reached the crown before the captain could, slipping it onto his finger and declaring himself the new king. With the crown's power restored, the giant army fell under his command once again. Seeing the final beanstalk to earth was about to snap, the captain took a leap of faith onto the vine, sliding down and diving into the moat near the castle. When the two-headed giant saw that the path was destroyed, he let out a thunderous roar of fury. Suddenly, his smaller head spotted the pouch of magic seeds lying on the ground. Finding 4 seeds inside, the giant rejoiced. He hurled them into the water below. The moment they hit, 4 massive beanstalks tore through the earth and shot toward the sky. The giant army began their descent, using the vines to swarm the human world. Meanwhile, Jack was watering his horse when he glanced at the sky and saw the giants descending. He hopped onto his horse and raced to warn the king. The king's army was marching casually back to the castle, unaware of the threat. Jack screamed a warning, but before the king could react, a horde of giants burst from the forest. They began tearing everything apart, snatching soldiers off their horses and swallowing them whole like snacks. A round-faced giant ripped the blades off a windmill and hurled them at the princess, shattering everything in the impact and knocking the king's crown to the dirt. Seeing the king's army approaching, the sentries at the castle prepared for war. The captain immediately ordered the soldiers to fill the defensive trench with oil. As the king's army reached the gates, the captain commanded a volley of flaming arrows. The moment the arrows hit the oil, a massive wall of fire erupted, blocking the giant's path and allowing the king's men to retreat safely inside. Seeing the princess was safe, the captain ordered the gates to be shut at once. But Jack was still outside, with the giants hot on his heels. As the heavy gates began to groan shut, Jack panicked. Only seconds remained between him and certain death. At the very last second, Jack spurred his horse and leaped through the narrowing gap of the gates. Close on his heels, the two-headed giant clawed his way up the entrance, but the captain acted fast, launching a counterattack that sent the beast tumbling directly into the raging moat of fire. Strangely, the other giants didn't lift a finger to help. They simply stood by and watched their comrade burn. The relief inside the castle was short-lived, however, as a massive iron bell suddenly plummeted from the sky, smashing through the fortifications and crushing the inner wall. Before the soldiers could regroup, the horns of war sounded. The giants launched 2 massive iron hooks onto the castle gates and began to pull with earth-shattering force. This was the strategy of the round-faced giant, who intended to rip the kingdom's defenses apart. Chaos erupted inside. The princess grabbed Jack's hand and pulled him toward the inner keep. The elderly king commanded his men to open fire with crossbows, but as more giants joined the fray, the pressure on the gates became unbearable. On the captain's signal, the soldiers fired heavy ballista bolts that slammed into the wooden gates to reinforce them. The king himself rushed to the front lines, frantically asking the captain for the giant's weakness. Suddenly, a rain of flaming trees began to fall from the sky, scattering the soldiers and loosening their grip. It seemed as though the gates would splinter at any moment. Meanwhile, as Jack and the princess reached the interior of the castle, a bone-chilling roar echoed, and the floor began to buckle and crack. Stones flew into the air as 2 massive hands burst through the ground. It was the two-headed giant. He had survived the fire by plunging into the sewer water and had snuck into the castle through the drainage system. The giant caught the royal scent of the princess. Jack and the princess huddled behind a heavy curtain, watching him, but in a fit of rage, the giant smashed a nearby mirror and spotted their reflection. Jack grabbed the princess and sprinted toward the second floor, but the giant was too fast, snatching her up in one swift motion. Jack swung a nearby axe at the beast, but the giant caught him in his other hand. The giant's smaller head began to mock Jack, laughing at his futile efforts. In a surge of adrenaline, Jack swung his axe and shattered the giant's helmet. As the beast roared and opened its massive maw to swallow Jack whole, Jack reached into his locket and tossed the last magic bean directly down the giant's throat. The moment the seed hit his stomach, the giant began to writhe in agony, dropping Jack and the princess to the floor. Seconds later, violent green vines burst forth from the giant's body. The hall exploded as the massive beanstalk expanded, and the king's crown, which had been clutched in the giant's hand, fell right at Jack's feet. Outside, the round-faced giant and his army were slowly crushing the last of the resistance. The wooden gates had splintered, and the inner iron portcullis finally buckled under the relentless pounding. As the doors fell, the giant army lunged forward, eager to feast on the soldiers. But then, a commanding voice thundered from behind them. Every giant froze. The round-faced giant looked through the crowd, and his weapon slipped from his hands, clattering to the floor. Terror washed over the horde as, one by one, the giants dropped to their knees in front of the humans. The captain and his men stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what could have humbled these bloodthirsty monsters. There stood Jack, silhouetted against the ruins, wearing the shimmering magic crown he had reclaimed from the fallen giant. He was now the master of the giants, and the war was over.